Welcome into Other People's Shoes, the podcast where listeners get to step into the lives of others and see the world through their shoes. Your host, Neil Matthews, is a seasoned interviewer who has a natural talent for empathizing with his guests and drawing out their unique perspectives. Through a combination of storytelling and insightful questioning, Other People's Shoes explores the lives of a diverse range of guests, from everyday people to celebrities and thought leaders. With a warm and welcoming style, Neil creates a safe and supportive space for his guests to share their stories, while also challenging listeners to broaden their perspective and think more deeply about the world around them. So tune in to Other People's Shoes with Neil Matthews and get ready to step into other people's shoes.
Hey, come take a walk with me, not like you used to do something different and put yourself in other people's shoes. Open up your mind and open up your eyes and change your direction. Change your perspective.
Inbounder. Clark gets it in. Gets it back with 10. Clark double teamed along the baseline. Throws it up the floor. Intercepted by Heen. Pegues for three. And the win. He got it with 2.2 to go. 68-67 Paladins. Virginia calls its final timeout. They get it into Beekman on the right side. His three on the way. No! No! And Furman wins it! Furman wins it! J.P. Pegues getting bombed by his teammates right here in front of us. The Paladins win it 68-67 and knock Virginia out of the tournament. Furman's first appearance since 1980 will not be one and done. Tom Van Hoy, look at this scene here on the floor.
Welcome in to Other People's Shoes. As you know, I am your host, Neil Matthews. Thank you so much for joining me today. Really excited that you've chosen to hit play today. Really excited that you're going to hang out with us today. I'm excited about being here today, and I'll tell you why. Because we're in a state we haven't been to very often. It's a state that has, I think, lions and definitely some tigers. I don't know about any bears, but oh my. We're sitting with, I think, the man that is behind the microphone today that is kind of a legend in some circles, depending on what circles you want to run around in. Let me tell you this. I'm a big, as you all know, March Madness fanatic. Now, I know the last couple of years, there hasn't been too much excitement in March for me, especially last March Madness tournament. If you look at your bracket from last year and scour it, you will find and discover, sadly, much like I did, when Selection Sunday, that's when they pick all the teams. My beloved Tar Heels were not there in the tournament of 64. I was very sad about that. I kind of rebounded as you do in sports, and I picked a team to really get behind, and that was the Tennessee Volunteers, and boy, they did not let me down. They beat the Duke Blue Devils, and so I was excited about that. Tennessee beat Duke. That was the only team I really cared about losing in the tournament, and I'm going to get some insight onto this today. Let me welcome in my new friend, Dan. Dan, how are you today?
I'm doing well. You use the term legend loosely, maybe in my own mind, which I've been accused of in a previous life, but it's great to be here. I got to tell you, I live in a part of the country where you will find zero empathy for your pain of North Carolina not making the NCAA tournament last year. I live outside of Clemson, and I've worked at Clemson and did a radio talk show 3 hours a day on the Clemson flagship station for 11 years. Down here, they believe in ABC, anybody but Carolina.
That kind of hurts a little bit.
I'm just telling you, that's the region that I live in, you know?
Dan, I didn't know we were going to go here already. Years ago, I was working for a cell phone company back when there was more than two cell phones, and we actually sold cell phone accessories of all college varieties, it seemed like. Clemson was one of them. I think we got close to the bookstore. I know we were talking to a guy who had a number of U.S. Cellular stores, Clemson kind of area, and he was a diehard Clemson guy, so him and I would go back and forth about Carolina Clemson. And I think to date, Clemson basketball, men's basketball, has only won in Chapel Hill like once in the last 10 years or something crazy like that?
Once ever.
Okay, once ever. That's what I thought.
That was like 2 years ago. They were 0 for Chapel Hill in the history of the rivalry until 2 or 3 seasons ago when they finally got that 900-pound gorilla off their back.
That's what I thought too, is I thought that they had gone one for a lot.
Yes. One forever.
One forever. Okay.
Yes. I'm a Furman Paladin now. So
that's why I was wondering. Now, where do your alliances lie? Because I know you're at Furman.
It's interesting. I made, you know how this works. I made a lot of dear friends when I was at Clemson. I was working there when Dabo Swinney was hired after being out of college football as a wide receivers coach by then head coach Tommy Bowden. I've known Dabo from his entire run at Clemson. A lot of great people. Tim Beret, who is a legend in the sports information business, who retired a few years ago but is still doing some things over there. I've made a lot of great friends. So the side of this business, especially as you get older and you've been in it a while, that really means the most relationships. You can move on. You still have those people that you worked with closely who developed what started off as a working relationship, and it became deeper than that. It became a friendship. It became somebody that you knew you could count on for whatever the situation may be. So there still are some of those people over at Clemson. A lot of them have retired. Unfortunately, some of them have passed on over the years. Obviously, the same type of relationship with many people in my current job at Furman football this season. I'll be entering my 13th year as the voice of the Paladins. And even with the Greenville Drive, the minor league team of the Red Sox that I do in the summer. The same thing. It's about developing relationships that transcends anything that happens on the field or on the court. I guess it's just a function of getting older. That's what I appreciate more than anything, I think, is those relationships that I've been able to cultivate over the years.
That's what I look forward to most about podcasting, by the way, is the idea of having that relationship. Is once you hit stop of the recording, I've noticed, at least in the last 5 years almost, that the relationship kind of almost stops with me and that guest. And it always saddens me. I thought we had kind of this amazing connection. It's rare that I circle back on a guest or they circle back with me. It's like, okay, we had this amazing moment, this cool thing, and now it's done. And for me as a person, not as a host, it's hard sometimes. You're somebody I'd like to get to know more. And we always say, oh yeah, we'll stay connected. Oh yeah, we'll stay in touch. And then it's like nothing happens.
And you know what that comes down to? It comes down to priorities and intentionality. You have to be intentional about doing things. I'm 56 years old, so a lot of these lessons have been learned by much more error than trial, but through trial and error, a lot of different aspects of this business. I have to catch myself. I do Furman football in the fall, which rolls right into basketball. There's an overlap. Basketball now rolls right into the Greenville Drive minor league season. There's a small overlap there. The season for minor league baseball extends to the point where there's a small overlap into football season starting again. It's a cycle that never ends. Now, it's a cycle that I love, at least right now, till God tells me something else. I don't see myself extracting myself from that cycle. I have to be intentional because you can get blinders on. In sports broadcasting, sometimes the only thing you have to do is be. You have to be at the ballpark. You have to be at the bus. You have to be at the stadium. You have to be at the team meal. Things are structured to a certain degree. You know what your schedule is. You know you're going to be on the road. You know you're going to be traveling. You're going to be doing all these things. And sometimes you can get blinders on, ignore everything that's going on around you. One of the things that I've learned, and I'm still learning, is intentionality. Intentionally stop and cultivate those relationships. The same way in following Christ, you have to intentionally stop and cultivate that relationship. I'm still a work in progress on both fronts.
Well, let's get going into you. I love this already. It's going to be fun. So, Dan, help me with this. What size shoes do you wear?
12.
Wow. Didn't even
12
think about
wide.
Didn't even think about that. That was good. So is there a style or brand that Furman maybe supplies for you? Help me with that.
Furman is a Nike school. They don't supply my shoes. I have some other Nike gear. Until just recently, I was wearing Nike shoes pretty much exclusively, but found out this horrible thing about the style of Nikes that I wear. They squeak when you walk. There's nothing you can do to stop the squeak. The risk of throwing my own school under the bus, recently switched back to New Balance. There you go. Everything else I wear is Nike, but I'm wearing New Balance tennis shoes now. So
please don't tell me
the dirty secret is exposed.
Please don't tell me they're the white New Balance kind, like the dad shoe New Balance. They're not those.
No.
Okay.
The New Balance 608s, the white with blue trim. They're a sharp looking shoe.
Envisioning the dad shoes you're walking into the arena as you're on press row. Everyone's mocking your attire.
No, I get mocked for other reasons. I don't have to worry about the shoes.
All right. Well, that's good. I just was looking out for you.
I got you. I appreciate it.
You know, if you just drive a little further, though, up the road, there's this amazing school in Chapel Hill. They'd probably get you some Jordans.
Yeah, again, every Nike shoe that I've worn squeaks.
I bet you those Jordans wouldn't. Dan Scott, you're only, what comes to mind?
Wow. Had you asked me that 15 years ago, the answer probably would have been much different. Right now, I think I answer that question in reference to myself. You're only here because of the grace of God. You're only here because of what Jesus Christ did for you. I tell people when I share my testimony, based on the lifestyle I was living and my health as recently as 12 years ago, I know that I'd be divorced and I'd probably be dead. When I hear you're only, that's the first thing that comes to mind. You're only here because of the grace of Jesus Christ.
But let's be honest. I mean, come on, Dan, you're highly successful. You worked for Clemson. I mean, you're dropping Dabo Sweeney for those sports fans out there. They're like, man, the man knows Dabo. That's fantastic. You got to call one of the greatest calls in probably tournament history, I think, in a long time. You went viral with that. CBS is using it. I mean, everybody's wanting a piece of Dan Scott, I would imagine, at one moment or a time. You know, what a great opportunity God has presented you with. I mean, again, it's easy to say, well, Dan did those things. God didn't do those things. It's like David. David did those things with David and Goliath, not God. David had the skill. David had the skill to kill the bear and to kill the lion, scripture says. So Dan Scott, come on now. Be honest with me. That's your ability.
The interesting thing about that, I believe I shared this with our mutual friend, Neil Getzlow, on his podcast. You go back the year before, people have to understand the context. Furman had not been to the NCAA tournament since 1980. And Furman is a school with a proud basketball history. In the 2022 Southern Conference Championship game, went to overtime. We had a kid hit a driving layup with 4.2 seconds, 4.3 seconds left in overtime to give us a 2-point lead, and it looked like that was going to be the moment. Chattanooga inbounded to a kid named David Jean Batiste, who in 4.3 seconds took the ball on the right side of the floor, drove all the way across to the left side, got across midcourt, and from 35 to 38 feet, double teamed, launched a three just ahead of the buzzer and nailed it and sent them to the NCAA tournament and crushed Furman's hopes. I thought to myself at the time, man, there went my shot at the moment. National radio, national television, they always pick up those conference championship winner calls. You get your opportunity. Instead, it went to Jim Reynolds, who's been at Chattanooga for 46, 47 years. The same guy, he just does this all the time. He clips and puts them on Twitter and marries the radio call with the clips. So he put Jim Reynolds' call up. He put the call of Jason Benetti from Westwood One, the national radio call. And then he said, yeah, sure, here's the Furman call, and had mine on it. Jim's was seen 50 or 60,000 times on Twitter. The Jason Benetti call, probably 25 or 30. And mine was seen about 6,000 times. But I got more feedback from that single call from national people who messaged me and said, I just want you to know how professionally you handled that. Wasn't screaming and crying that we lost our opportunity. It was a fantastic moment just for the other team. And I tried to call it like a professional broadcaster. I got that little God wink at that moment. So you fast forward a year, we get to the championship game again. Furman ends up winning the Southern Conference Championship, and I get a little bit of that moment on that call. It's not so dramatic because we won it by 9 or 11 points. But then you get to the first round of the NCAA tournament against Virginia. That game comes down to the wire. Furman's the 13 seed. Virginia's the 4 seed. For people who have seen it, a veteran fifth-year guy for Virginia made an uncharacteristically bonehead mistake in a double team, threw the ball up the floor. One of our kids, the kid with the worst hands on the team, by the way, played it like a free safety. Garrett Heen picked the pass off, one dribble to his right. J.P. Pegues shot the three. By the way, he had missed his previous 15 threes. Nailed the three that gave Furman the win. And as you said, that call went viral. The next day, I did 7 radio interviews. 2 of them were national. So as I look back at it now, to me, it's God saying, maybe you personally weren't ready for the moment a year ago. Maybe now he's saying, I was ready for the moment. Then here's the other part of it, Neil. For 48 hours, as you said, CBS opened its coverage with that call the next 2 days. It was everywhere until Sunday came along. And then the next moment happened. And then 72 hours later, nobody knew who I was. Did you do it in your own strength? This was you who did this. I say no. I say this was God allowing me to have the moment and then reminding me 72 hours later that he's the one who gave me the moment. Because as I said, I went from being viral to nobody knowing that I exist. Being able to look at it now, looking back, I appreciate it more than maybe I even did at the moment. I can see his hand and him reminding me that I'm the one who allowed you to have this moment, and don't ever forget that.
Well, don't you think that's the danger as a Christ follower or even as a man in general? Is that sometimes when we're presented with something or something amazing happens, it's immediately we get the credit for it. I had an old pastor tell me, I get the praise, he gets the glory. And for years, I struggled with that phrasing. I get the praise, he gets the glory. I'm like, I don't know about that. What do you make of that?
In a situation like that, I understand what he's saying. You're going to get the praise. I got the praise of Furman fans. I got the praise of people from all over the country for that call. As I look back on it now, the one thing that I laugh at and kind of take a deep breath at is my moment finally came. I'm glad I didn't choke. But that aside, you do get praise. The Bible tells us we're not supposed to seek praise of men. I didn't seek the praise of men. It just came. My job then is to remember why I was allowed to have that moment anyway. And that's where he gets the glory. So yeah, people praised me for that call, not for the talent God gave me, if not for the grace that he's shown me, if not for the timing of everything, I don't get that moment. So everything that I did in the preceding days, I tried to make sure, whether it was an interview, whether it was talking to people, whatever it was, texts, I tried to make sure that I gave God the glory for that, because ultimately he's the one who allowed it to happen.
That's so profound to me that even in the moment you can give it back to him.
Listen, it's not easy. I'm human. That pride will start to well up in you. That's why, as I say now, I'm so appreciative and can almost laugh about it a little bit that 72 hours later, nobody knew I existed. I'd be lying if there wasn't that moment where I said, hey, you know what? I nailed that. That's pretty good. Good job, Dan. Started patting myself on the back. Tried to catch myself in that. I think that was just God's way of allowing me the moment, but then reminding me he's the one who gave it to me. I'd be lying if I said that a little bit of that pride didn't creep in and I had to be intentional about chasing it out.
Let's face it, it was a kind of a David and Goliath moment when Furman beat Virginia. I know I didn't have that in my bracket. I love that you can kind of, again, point back to him and say, listen, it was him. It wasn't me. Again, I know it's a struggle and it had to have been challenging to do that. I'm going to have you jump in the time machine for a minute if you can with me. Can you take me back to December 14th, 2021? Is that a possibility?
December 14th of 2021.
Yeah. Do you know what happened on that day?
No, but I'm sure you're going to tell me.
74-61, Carolina over Furman.
Oh, yes. Yes. In the Dean Dome.
Were you at that game? Please tell me you were at that game.
I was.
All right.
It was a game that was tied at the half.
I was just going to say it was tied at the half. Yes, sir.
Furman went into a bit of a shooting slump in the early stages of the second half. And then you'll have to forgive me. I can't remember the guy's name, but it's for a big white kid, big center. That all of a sudden we had some trouble keeping off the boards in the second half. But yeah, that was a game that was tied at the half. I think there were a lot of people in the Dean Dome that day who were wondering what in the world is going on.
There probably were, and I was probably one of those people not in the Dean Dome worrying about that. Yes, I had to go back and look because I was like, wait, I think Carolina played Furman. I just couldn't remember when, so I had to look it up. Carolina 74, Furman 61, sadly. Brady Manick is probably who you're referring to. He had 6 rebounds in only 19 minutes of play. I think his minutes started to creep up because on that tournament run in 2021, he did okay for us.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, he did most of his damage against us in the second half.
Most likely, because he was probably playing more. I just had to get that in there. Sorry.
It wasn't a game that Furman was expected to win anyway.
What part of the story in your mind is the most crucial that really helps people understand Dan Scott the most?
Wow, that's a good question. I think there are multiple facets of it. When I was 7 or 8 years old, maybe even a little younger than that, time frame is fuzzy. I was sexually abused by a group of older kids who lived in the coal camp area where my grandmother lived at the time, and it happened over an extended period of time till one man found out about it and put a stop to it. And I share my testimony. I didn't realize then the effect that it had on me. It played multiple roles. It warped my view of sex and other things as I got older. The thing that it most contributed to was massive insecurity that I really struggled with all through junior high, high school. And as I tell people, it kind of surprises them. The job that I have, public speaking that I do, that it can still be a battle sometimes today. It was that insecurity that led me to developing kind of an alternate personality. My favorite television show growing up was MASH. I became very much like Hawkeye Pierce, loud, wisecracking, practical joker who kept that public persona out in front of people so nobody could really see what was going on inside. That's who I was for a long, long time. What happens that insecurity began to manifest itself in different ways. I began searching for something to fill a Jesus-shaped hole in my heart. I kept searching for something to find an identity in, searching for something to ease the pain that I had. I kept searching for something to fill a void in my life. I used alcohol. It's not a joking matter, but I used to joke that I got to the point that I was spelling drink with a U instead of an I. Pornography was my biggest challenge. The only way that can go is it only get worse. It doesn't get better. And I battled that for years. I chased money, wasted. I can't tell you how much money I wasted over the years. Cheated on my wife. And I'm not proud to say that. It's part of who I was and part of the redemption. So I cheated on her physically and emotionally for years. Had all kinds of secret little online relationships. Women I never met, I would talk to online for years. I'm doing all these things. I'm searching. Nothing fills that void. And what happens is that you'll get a little bit of pleasure. And the Bible says there's pleasure in sin for a season. Then you find yourself feeling disgusted with your behavior again. And then the cycle starts over. But when it starts over, it gets worse and it gets worse and it gets worse. That's who I was and what I was battling for a good portion of my life up until a little over 11 years ago.
Would the Dan Scott of 11 years ago recognize the current Dan Scott?
I think he would see the guy that he wanted to be, the guy that he knew he should be. Raised in a Christian home. My dad was and still is a pastor and a preacher. He's 75 years old and still going. I had the foundation. I knew right from wrong. I knew all of that stuff. Call it the prototypical prodigal son, call it the prototypical preacher's kid, however you want to couch it. Despite having all of that head knowledge, I had never committed it to my heart. I had never made that decision for Christ. Wonderful thing about Scripture is that the Bible's always right. Proverbs 22:6 that says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he gets older, he won't depart from it. And when I share my testimony, I'll tell people that all the time, that all that time that I was doing all these things, I use the word knucklehead just to kind of lighten the mood a little bit. Far worse than being a knucklehead. All the time that I was doing that stuff, I knew I was wrong. The Bible talks about your heart hardens. Get good at pushing things away for at least a while. But I could never fully get away from it. As bad as things got, they didn't get as worse as they could be, because I was always cognizant that if I don't do something to change the way that I am behaving, I'm going to end up losing everything that I have and maybe killing myself. Got to the point where there was a line drawn in the sand with my family that ultimately woke me up, because I was on the verge of losing everything. Wife, my kids, everything that I love. Talk about all that behavior, those other things you were doing. I love my wife, Angela. I love my children. God's blessed us with 3 grandchildren now and a 4th one on the way. And praise him that I got myself right before my daughters got married. They didn't see a Christian dad growing up, but they can see one now and a Christian grandfather. Love them. The whole time all this was going on, that's what Satan does. He blinds you. I was looking for satisfaction in all of these other ways, and it was a fruitless endeavor. I never found it.
You mentioned as part of your story growing up that there was a man that came into your life that kind of stopped the abuse from happening with those neighbor kids. Was there somebody that came into your life that kind of pushed Dan back on the right track with all of the hypocrisy and all of the fakeness? So that's kind of what I'm discerning from what you said.
I was a poser.
That's the word I was actually seeking. I was like, is that applicable here, a poser?
Because of my public life, see, I got all that secret, and I got pretty good at hiding things for a while. My public life, there were people who actually thought that I was a Christian. I never said I was, would never correct them if they made reference to it. In my public life, when I was doing the talk show at the Clemson station for 11 years, in my 3 hours over 11 years, we literally raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for multiple charitable events. I was looked at as a fairly upstanding member of the community. So I got pretty good at hiding all that stuff. Was there someone that directed me back?
Or maybe even came and confronted you, kind of like a Nathan situation with David, going back to him. The prophet came and said, hey, I know you've been doing this stuff.
Not in a confrontational way. I had a conversation with pastor of the church that I was going to at the time. And that's the other irony in this. I was going to church. One of the rare times, maybe the only other time that I ever confided in anybody that this is what's really going on. Remember this clearly as it happened yesterday. We were sitting in Ruby Tuesdays in Clemson, South Carolina. He did everything in his power to try to get me to give my life to Christ sitting at that table. And I was just stubborn, and I wouldn't do it, or I couldn't do it. The person I give a lot of the credit to, Neil, this is a God thing. The situation with my wife and I and our family, it blew up twice. It blew up on December the 23rd, 2011. 2011. Then I was sorry I got caught. Blew up for the final time on June 9th of 2012, and I got saved the next day. After that December 23rd of 2011 blow up, when all of my double life was exposed, I told my wife that the only way I would go to counseling is if we found a Christian counselor. I'm not a Christian. I'm looking back. Was I hoping that we wouldn't find one? I don't know. Her name's Kim McManus. For the next 6 months, we went to counseling, individual sessions and as a couple. It wasn't an easy road because I was still being a knucklehead. I would leave those counseling sessions a lot of times and then go do some of the same stuff that I was doing before. But it was in there where I began to rediscover or discover for the first time some of the true feelings that I had for my wife, Angela. I always loved her. Exploring the depths of that. There were some things she shared in counseling that had happened to her when she was younger that she never shared with me before. So it kind of explained some of her behavior that would send me off doing other things rather than wanting to be home. It was a rocky road. It was in those counseling sessions, in a Christian counseling session, that I really began to let that guard down, shield that I had put up between my real self and the rest of the world. That's when it began to come down. I give God the credit because he's the one who put her in our lives. When I said the only way I'll go to counseling is if we find a Christian counselor, I was challenging my wife. Yeah, go out and find one. See how that works out for her. And I actually found out the doctor I was going to at the time is the one who told me about this is a God thing. And I hadn't thought about this for years until just now, Neil. But she gave me the business card of Kim. It would have been very easy looking back on it for me just to wad that thing up after I got out of the doctor's office and throw it away. Did for whatever reason, I came home and I gave it to my wife and I said, here's a Christian counselor that the doctor's office told me about. You can look back with that kind of hindsight being 2020 and see God directing steps even before you were saved. It's just incredible how he orchestrates things.
Well, it is incredible. It's incredible from the standpoint that could have easily said no. You could have said no anywhere along the way. I think there would be those that would challenge that if you were really truly in love with Angela, how could you do those things to her? Ask that.
First and easiest answer that people who are not Christians won't understand is sin, and sin blinds you. We are in, even as Christians, the Bible tells us we're in spiritual warfare, that Jesus himself called Satan the prince of this world for the time being. There's a spiritual warfare aspect to it. I would imagine that there are a lot of people out there who have done things that they're not proud of, whether it's cheating on a spouse or whatever the case may be. They can say with some degree of honesty that they did love their spouse. Now, the other side of that coin is that there was a point where I thought that I didn't love her anymore. And in fact, I had moved out of the house after this thing blew up. I'd moved out of the house living in a hotel because of the talk show. I was able to work out a trade deal where I could do advertising to let me stay for free. But then you know that 10 days after that, I got fired from the radio station and I had no place to go back but home. And that's when we had to start confronting the issues. I couldn't run and hide anymore. That's when we started the counseling, and that's when all these things came up. That's when I began to realize, even though it still took 6 months and more bad behavior and more pain and heartache, that's when I began to realize, despite all of the stuff that I'm doing, that I do love this woman and I do love my kids and I don't want to lose them. And I would say that, and then I'd walk out. I would go and start drinking and looking at things on the computer I shouldn't look at, talking to women I should. So it was just that spiritual battle, that spiritual tug of war going back until it came to that point of no return. As I said, on June 9, 2012, line was drawn in the sand when all of the stuff that I was doing was found out again. And my daughters left the house. They were disgusted with me. And my oldest daughter was getting married 6 weeks later. She tore out of the house, got in her car. Our driveway slopes down to the road. She got down to the bottom of the driveway. She slammed on the brakes. The car actually skidded to a stop, put it in park. She flung her door open. She marched back up our driveway and she pointed her finger in my face and she said, "You can forget about walking me down the aisle." She left to go to her fiance's house. My youngest daughter went to her youth pastor's house, and it was just my wife and I. And I was expecting what I had seen from Angela many, many times over the years. I was expecting her to go absolutely ballistic. I was expecting yelling and screaming and being berated and all of these things. That kind of one of those turnoffs. It's one of those things I used to justify behavior. I'm living with this. No, I'm going to go out and find somebody who appreciates me. You know, it's the old "my wife doesn't understand me" thing. But she didn't do any of that. We were in our bedroom and she looked at me and she said 4 words: "What's it going to be?" That's all she said. And I said, "I need to go talk to my dad, who lives in West Virginia, 5 hours away." And unbeknownst to me, she had been in contact with my parents over the last 6 months, telling them what an idiot I was and trying to get them to give her some advice on what to do. We left at 9:30 on a Saturday night, made the 5-hour drive to my parents' house, got there at 2:30 in the morning. At 7:30, I was sitting in the living room waiting on my dad to come in. By 8 o'clock, I had given my life to Christ. After we went to church that morning and I went forward and made the public profession, went to dinner, we left, and the longest 5 hours that I've ever had in my life was that drive home. Angela thought she knew everything that I'd been doing. I confessed everything to her, a whole bunch of stuff she did not know. Got home, she just said, "You're just going to have to give me some time to process this." My daughters were back in the house when we walked in. I kissed them both on the forehead and told them that I'd given my life to Christ. And I said, "I know those are just words to you right now. You're going to have to see a change." And I get that. From that, it was starting to rebuild those relationships. And through the grace of God, only through his grace, I can say that Angela and I are at a place in our marriage now that we have never been before. We are so much in tune with one another, in love with one another. My relationship with my daughters has been repaired. Those relationships are wonderful. As I said, we have 3 grandchildren, a 4th one on the way. None of that's possible without the grace of Jesus Christ. My regret is that I caused people so much pain in getting to that point, but that pain has become my testimony because it's all him. Talk about a God who pursues us. I could go on and on and on about the things that he did in pursuing me before June 10th of 2012. Bottom line is, it's nothing that I did. It's all Jesus.
What would you say to a guy who is walking through that right now, or who maybe has walked through that and is now trying to rebuild everything, that things have come out, or maybe he's still hiding? What would you say to that guy right now? What advice and counsel would you give to him if they're listening right now, which I hope they are?
I would tell that man or that woman, it does happen in the other way. I would tell that person, all of this didn't happen overnight. It's not going to clear up overnight. Pain that you've caused is not going to be easily forgotten or forgiven. Those of us who are Christian, we're told all the time, reading the Bible. Peter asked Jesus, "My brother sins against me. How many times do I forgive him? 7?" And Jesus said 70 times 7. In other words, we're always supposed to forgive someone. So a former pastor of mine used to say that's easy preaching and hard living. It's going to take time. The 2 best pieces of advice that I can give that person, number 1, is that words aren't going to do it. It's actions. They're going to have to see that you're a different person. And number 2, you've got to rely on the strength of Jesus to do it through the Holy Spirit, because you can't do it on your own. While he is changing you, he's also working on the hearts of the people you hurt. You have to realize it's a battle that you can't win on your own. You have to be contrite. You have to be a different person, and you can only be that through the strength of Christ. He has to work on both sides of the aisle. It's not just you. He has to work in the heart of the other person, and sometimes that can take a long time. Sometimes that can take a long time, even a year or 2 after I'd gotten saved. My youngest daughter, when I finally gave my life to Christ, she was a junior in high school. She would act out, as teenagers are apt to do. When she would do it, she would always play that blame game. Well, it's because of the person that you were and all that stuff that you were doing. It's messed me up. She would always pull that card out, and every time she did it, I would apologize. And then finally it hit me one night. She tried it again. Christ forgave me. I confessed everything to him. I confessed everything to you. I've asked your forgiveness. It's been at least a year. You've seen the change in my life. I said, the apology stopped tonight. If you've got a problem now, the problem is not between you and me. The problem is between you and God. And I'm not apologizing anymore. I've done that. He's forgiven me. Now it's up to you to work out whatever it is you've got going on between you and God. And that was the moment that our relationship seriously started to heal. If you're going through this, you can't do it all on your own. It's going to take the grace of God, both in your life and in the lives of people that you've hurt, or if you're the one who's been hurt.
So do you feel like if God didn't come into your life and really make his presence real and known, is your marriage still intact? Is your relationship with your daughter still intact?
No, in my own strength, I didn't have it. The road that I was heading down, literally a path of destruction, and it was getting worse and worse and worse. I mean, you'd think a logical person after it blew up the first time would have gotten it, but I didn't. I thought I was just smarter than everybody else. I thought I could, okay, they found out the first time. Now I'll build up another level of security in between me and them and my electronics and my internet and all that other stuff. I wasn't smart enough. Looking back on it in hindsight, you can see God directing all these things. And no matter what roadblocks that I put up, he is more than capable of knocking down and getting through them.
I love that a lot. Well, Dan, thanks for sharing that. So Dan, on that thread, how can folks learn more about you and what you're all about? And maybe even if they want to, catch a game that you're calling, because that would be fun to do.
My website is danscottshow.org. I do a weekly Christian radio show coming towards the end of the first year. It's basically telling stories of God working in people's lives, telling a lot of stories that are similar to mine. Our mutual friend, Neil Getzlow, he's been on my radio show and I've been on his podcast. We walked a similar path in a lot of ways. A lot of stories like that we're telling with that radio show. It's part of a nonprofit organization called Grand Slam Ministries. So you can get to the Grand Slam Ministries page by going to danscottshow.org. From a Furman standpoint, FurmanPaladins.com, athletic department's website, on our football schedules and basketball schedules, there's a listen live link. There's a link to watch it. I don't do the ESPN Plus broadcast. I used to. I settled back into my comfort zone. If you follow me on Twitter, or I guess now X, at Dan Scott Show, you'll occasionally see some highlights. You'll get a lot of stuff there. It's a Grand Slam for God X handle. I'm still going to call it Twitter, regardless of what Elon Musk renamed it. There's a Grand Slam Ministries Facebook page, as well as my personal and ministry Facebook pages. If people want to find me, they can. I love interacting with people. Just encourage folks, if they do have any questions about anything, they can reach me through the website, or my email address is dan@danscottshow.org.
That's fantastic. I love it. Well, Dan, we like to do some silliness at the end of every show. I felt like we had some kind of silliness in the beginning and then got some real serious stuff. And so now I feel like we got to end with some silliness. How do you feel about that?
I'm all for it. Let's go.
Let's go. So I tried. I want you to know I really tried hard. I know you were coming on. I reached out to Furman. I even reached out to Clemson to get a cup. We do this random question at the end of the show. And so I always put a cup in a die. They sent me this, Dan. I don't know if you can see that on the screen. I don't know. Who do I talk to about that? They sent me the wrong cup.
I can guarantee you that nobody at Clemson sent you that cup.
No, they did. I promise. I could show you the return address label and everything. Is it okay if it's in a North Carolina cup? I mean, is that gonna freak you out a little bit?
Go ahead.
Well, here we go. So 6 random questions. You don't have to answer all 6. Just one.
Okay.
This is hilarious. That's the number 1.
Okay.
Just so you know. It's a North Carolina themed die even around here. That's how cool it is around here. So just get on board with that. One place you need to visit before everything's all said and done with you.
Probably can answer that question in hindsight now, because my wife and I took a vacation this year, past summer, that we've been trying to take for about 4 or 5 years, but she's had some recurring health issues, but we finally got to do it. The 2 main places were San Diego, which I'd always heard great things about, and it was phenomenal. We have decided we have to go back, and the Grand Canyon, which we had wanted to see and finally got to see in person. Moving forward, if the opportunity ever presented itself, I think we both would like to go to England, maybe branch out and see some of the Scottish and Irish countryside, because we watched some TV shows from over there and it's just gorgeous. Maybe explore Great Britain would be the future answer to that question.
You know how I would answer that question?
You want to go to North Carolina basketball?
I do. I want to see the Dean Dome.
You've never been?
I have never been. So I was born in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And yes, I drank the water.
I got some people who want to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm sure. And they also want my identity and my social security number too, right? Exactly. That's how my mom all the time. She's like, have you called them yet? And my answer is always, yeah, Mom, I've called them. And they're still not calling me back.
There you go.
Parents were actually in Beaufort, South Carolina, before me.
Down on the coast.
I don't know if that's exciting to you or not. I've heard stories that Beaufort is not that exciting.
No, but it's close enough to some things that are. Down there, you're on the doorstep of Myrtle Beach. If the beach is your thing, that's at least in the same neighborhood.
I like the ocean. I just don't like the sand. I don't know how you can have the ocean and not have the sand. I don't know. If I can figure that out, that'd be amazing. Well, Dan, I just want to say seriously, though, thank you. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for what you shared. I love the insight that you gave. It was so good. So thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. Any insight that I have is only by the grace of God. Try very hard to give him credit, the praise, and the glory for everything, because without him, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. And all of this, someday, discipline myself to sit down and do it. It's got the makings of what I think would be an entertaining and educational book. Maybe the final chapter's not been written. We'll have to wait and see.
Well, guys and gals, kids and campers alike, that's it. That's all. That's our show today. I know, some sports stuff in there. I was giddy. Could you tell? I had to get some Carolina stuff in there. Come on now. The guys calling basketball games. I had to fit that in there. Was it too much to brag that we beat them? Was that over the top? Speaking of things that may be over the top, your life right now, is that maybe over the top still? Are you still wondering about who you're going to be and what you're going to be? I'm wondering about that for you right now. In this moment for you, when you look at your life, how will it be defined? If you were to somehow get a dictionary, I know back in the day we used to have those not online and we'd be able to look words up. If somehow you looked up your life and the definition of who you are, what would you find? What would be the thesaurus. That's a big word too. Thesaurus. What would be the words associated with you in your life? Would you be defined by your achievements and your accolades? Or would it be the things that no one else sees? A point to ponder, perhaps, as we get out of here today. Just want to remind you of this before we leave. Don't forget, remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. I want to say thank you so much for listening. And by the way, stay tuned till next week when we walk in other people's shoes.